Hello everyone, welcome to the Healthy Honeys podcast. My name is Holly, and on this show we discuss all the details of living a healthy and conscious life. Ow! Do you know? Sorry, my cat just jumped on me. We'll have plenty of guests sharing their stories, go over research to help us make informed decisions, and I'll share my own experiences as someone who has battled chronic illness, organ failure, and has had a lot of healing in the non-traditional alternative medicine world. The past 3 episodes we've been discussing birth and promoting fertility, and I want to go off on a related topic, but something you might not think about right away. It's something that we consume daily and has a huge impact on our fertility. One of the main questions I get on Instagram is how can I improve my ability to have healthy children? And of course, I give advice based around the nutritional support that helped me get pregnant. But I really should have been giving this advice as well. Today we're going to be discussing something slightly controversial but important, and that's tap water. How it gets to a, quote, safe and drinkable state, and if it's worth making the switch to a different source. We'll also be discussing my favorite water sources and, if need be, detox methods for the health issues that can come up from bad water. I also want to frame this as Water 101 rather than every part of the water health situation, because there are other things I'm not going to get into in this episode, but hopefully will later, such as true hydration, structured water, etc. Now, when I say controversial, I mean just not popular to discuss. You'll often hear people dismiss a desire to take care of yourself and avoid unhealthy habits with saying, oh, everything causes cancer, or we all end up in the ground anyway. But no, not everything causes cancer, and while everyone dies, we don't all have the same quality of life before we get to that point. Whether that dismissal is coming from not wanting to take responsibility for their health or just being absolutely overwhelmed with all the information out there, which I totally understand, this is actually an easier switch than you'd think, and it makes a massive impact. But let's start off with whether or not we need to make that switch. In the Western world, most people are getting their water from their local municipal water system. Bear with me, I promise this is important to my point. It might be a little dry for a second. These water systems treat wastewater with multiple levels of clarification, from the initial pre-treatment that gets rid of any large items like flushable wipes to toys, to then getting rid of dirt and sand through grit chambers. After that, the wastewater is put in settling vats where larger particles settle to the bottom and the water is skimmed off the top. After this, the water in theory shouldn't have anything but organic human waste in it. Now we go into secondary treatment, where bacteria get to feast and massive amounts of air is pumped through the water to achieve aerobic digestion, the breakdown of organic matter through excess oxygen. The mixture is then filtered again to remove the bacteria to be used again later and any leftover large solids and biological matter. Now we move to disinfection, where the most common disinfectants being used today is either chlorine or chloramine. Chloramines are formed when they add ammonia to the chlorine in the treatment process. These are actually removed before the water is discharged because we often discharge our wastewater into streams or lakes, and those things would kill the sensitive bacteria and wildlife that reside there. Keep that in mind for later. Another disinfection process is ozone, where they use electric currents to kill microbes or UV light exposure. That's to clarify, this is wastewater, not to make it drinkable, and that's a whole other process that we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, I went through that whole process because I want to ask you, do any of these processes sound like they're going to be filtering out the drugs, pharmaceuticals, or any other chemicals that are being eliminated by our bodies and going into the waterway system? One study, which I'll link in the show notes, looked at the water for more than 28 million people to see how many pharmaceuticals and potential endocrine disruptors, or EDCs, they would find. Well, they found beta blockers, anticonvulsants, antilipidemics, and anti-anxiety medications in traceable contaminations. Very small amounts, but not so small when you take into account the amount of water someone drinks in a day. Joanna Wilson at McMaster University has researched adult zebrafish being chronically exposed to the low concentrations of pharmaceuticals and found that they don't reproduce as much as their non-contaminated counterparts. And when they do, the embryos often have anatomical deformations and developmental problems. Does that sound familiar? The one that is most worrying to me is birth control and other human hormone pharmaceuticals and how it's impacted a fish in southern Ontario, the rainbow darter. If they are living downstream from where the wastewater is discharged, the males turn into females. Yes, you're not crazy. You heard me right. I'm going to link it in the show notes if you think I'm just quoting Alex Jones here, but they actually find eggs in the male rainbow darter's testes. More and more women are being prescribed birth control from a very young age, which means that there will be more and more synthetic female hormones in our water supply. And I don't think it's any coincidence that men's testosterone has been significantly dropping since the 1970s. Now, if those stats weren't enough to make you worry, let's look at what they add after they take it back out of the lakes and streams which it was originally discharged into. This process is similar to the process with the wastewater, filtering out dirt, sediment, though this time it's fish and animal poop rather than our own. But the biggest difference is the addition of chemicals like chlorine, chloramine, and fluoride. I might lose some of you there because fluoride seems to be such a touchy subject, but there is real data behind this, and I won't get into it here. It's actually a huge human rights violation to be administering what the government calls health-altering quantities of what they consider a medication to a population without consent. But again, I won't get into that here. Let's look at fluoride a little closer. Many people refer to it as natural because fluorine is a naturally occurring element, but not every element in the periodic table is meant to be consumed, like lead, lithium, or my favorite, radium. When people hear the word natural, they think of it in the colloquial sense, as in it's been tried and tested over generations. That's not the meaning of natural when talking about fluorine. What we use most often to fluoridate our water, though, is fluorosilicic acid, and it is a chemical byproduct of the steel, concrete, and phosphate industry. Once we consume this chemical, only about 50% of it is able to leave our system. The other 50% sticks around, building up day after day a cumulative toxin. It mostly accumulates in our bones and teeth, as you might imagine, and because it's highly negatively charged, it interacts with positively charged ions like magnesium and calcium. These two are imperative to proper bone health. When fluoride reacts with calcium, we get calcium fluoride, which makes our bones more brittle by replacing the calcium hydroxyapatite. This leads to skeletal fluorosis, where we see brittle bones, chronic pain, and significant calcification of ligaments and joints. According to the NRC, the consumption of just fluoridated water at 1 part per million, no other sources of fluoride from treatments or whatever, quote, bone fluoride levels can reach 2,500 milligrams per kilogram in 12 years and to 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams per kilogram over longer periods. Skeletal fluorosis starts around 4,000 milligrams per kilogram. Isn't it interesting that so many people hit a certain age and start having horrible chronic pain in their lower back, arthritis, etc., and that age seems to be getting younger and younger? Now this is a big one. The research I read when I was pregnant convinced me to stay away because of the impact on an infant's brain. On average, babies whose mothers were exposed to fluoride through water had IQ deficits. If the mother was exposed to 1 part per million of fluoride, her baby would have an IQ deficit of 6 points. In infants directly exposed to fluoride, as in if the baby was fed formula made with fluoridated water, their IQs dropped again. Many proponents of fluoride will say that a few IQ points isn't that big of a deal, but what? That's a blatant admission that it's poison. And this research is short-term. It's not looking at the cumulative effects over our entire lives. The National Toxicology Program, or the NTP, which on October 22nd published a review draft of fluoride neurotoxicity, concluded, quote, fluoride is presumed to be a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard to humans. This conclusion is based on a consistent pattern of findings in human studies across several different populations, showing that higher fluoride exposure is associated with decreased IQ or other cognitive impairments in children, end quote. And as the truthaboutfluoride.com said, you can repair a cavity, but you cannot repair a child's brain. The funny thing about this is that a lot of the push to fluoridate our water in the past was actually pushed by the sugar industry. In the book, The Case Against Fluoride, on pages 263 to 65 reads, quote, in 1949, 1 year before the U.S. Public Health Service endorsed fluoridation, the director of the Sugar Research Foundation, a lobby representing about 130 sugar interests, said that its research mission was to, quote, find out how tooth decay could be controlled effectively without restriction of sugar intake, end quote. For the sugar lobby, fluoride, delivered through the water supply, quickly became the magic bullet to achieve that goal. From the earliest days of fluoridation, considerable sums of money were paid to prominent fluoride researchers at leading American universities, end quote from The Case of Fluoride. Let me also say that I am not anti-sugar. I like sugar. I even think it can be therapeutic in the right context. But I am against corporate interest influencing science to make sure they don't ever lose any money. Now, there are countless other health problems that fluoride has been linked to, but I think those are enough for today. I promise I'm going to get to the alternatives soon. This can be a little bit dark. I just want to go over one more thing so we know exactly what we need to look for when we're looking for filters. Chlorine and chloramine. Like in the initial wastewater process we went into earlier, chlorine and chloramine are used to disinfect the water we get through our taps. Only this time, they don't remove it. You'll often smell and taste it slightly when you aren't using tap water anymore. My cousin would come to visit from BC where they don't fluoridate or use such strong disinfection chemicals and would complain about the water taste here, and I thought she was just being prissy. But then I moved to BC and I could tell the difference right away. Chlorine specifically reacts with organic matter in the water and form total trihalomethanes, or TTHMs, as I'm going to say it now because that's a mouthful, a recognized group of carcinogens. 17% of bladder cancers are caused by TTHMs, and women with breast cancer have 50 to 60% more TTHMs in their fat tissue than those with no breast cancer. Those chemicals can also impact our microbiome, like I was talking about before. They remove the chlorine to discharge the water into streams and lakes for that reason, but don't do that for the general population's drinking water. The difference between chlorine and chloramine is that chlorine isn't nearly as stable, which in this case is actually a good thing. You can easily remove it by letting your water air out, boiling the water, UV light, or using most basic filters. Chloramine, on the other hand, is much more stable. It'll also kill your fish if you refill their tank with it, and you shouldn't use chloraminated water for dialysis either. A big health issue with chloraminated water is that it is corrosive and can allow lead from pipes into our drinking water. It is also linked to increased asthma and respiratory problems. It aggravates digestive disorders, and not to mention the denaturation of hemoglobin in the blood. Attention to all the people with anemia, stop drinking tap water. Now let's look at the best alternatives to tap water. I think if you made it this far, you're probably convinced, but I still recommend that you look at all of the resources that I have in the show notes. One option for drinking water is a gravity-fed water purification system. You might have seen the Berkey on everybody's countertops. They specifically filter out chlorine to untraceable levels and remove 99.9% of chloramine. You'll soon see that nothing is perfect, but the Berkey does a good job here. You do, however, need to buy another filter attachment to reduce fluoride long-term, which is an extra expense on top of a pretty expensive unit. Another benefit is that the Berkey does keep minerals in the water. What we use in my house is grocery store reverse osmosis water. You've probably seen these water dispensers at the end of an aisle in your local store. It's not really expensive and not that inconvenient either. We just bring the large bottles with us when we need to pick something up from the store. The process starts with tap water, but through reverse osmosis, most contaminants like fluoride, chloramine, they're removed. According to Primo Water, which is the company that does the reverse osmosis in my area, their website says that lead, cyanide, ethylbenzene, mercury, arsenic, and fluoride are all measured at 0 parts per million after their filtration. Oh, did I forget to mention that those are also in our tap water? Oops. Primo's the most common brand where I live, but I do your own research to see whatever RO brand is available near you. Some might not remineralize the water, which is very important. You want to make sure you're not stripping your body of minerals if drinking zero water. Even though Primo remineralizes, I still add trace mineral drops back in. Also, water that goes through an RO system can be slightly acidic, so it's important to find one that alkalizes to a certain degree as well. I don't know much about alkaline water itself, but I've heard good things, and I hope to do more research on it in the future. Speaking of alkaline water, there is the Kangen, I think that's how you pronounce it, which doesn't actually filter water at all, but separates acidic from alkaline and allows you to consume the alkaline. I don't recommend this as your only water system. There are more things to worry about, like with all the pharmaceuticals and everything. So that's that on that. Now you might not want to go to the grocery store every week like we do, or have to lug large bottles of water up flights of stairs like we do. You wouldn't be called crazy by us, that's for sure. For those of you who own your own place, you can actually find RO systems for your whole house. The Home Depot has them, and they can remineralize after the intense filtration. I again would add that add more minerals back in, but that's just me. The benefits of a full house system is that you can use any tap in the house and you'll be fine, including your shower. You can get under the sink RO systems that will work just for one tap as well. These will run you about $300 Canadian, and you can pick up a good one with a third-party certification at Home Depot. What we use for the shower right now, because we're renting, is the Live Pristine shower filter, and it is the only shower filter I found that gets rid of every nasty thing in our water. If you're living in an area that fluoridates, our water is sourced by the city that is closest to us. My hair hates it. This is a must-have. It also uses a special kind of carbon, activated catalytic carbon, to remove the chloramine. I have an affiliate link with them if you'd like to check them out. Your skin, hair, and respiratory system will thank you. It'll be in the show notes below. The reason it's important to have a filter for bathing as well as drinking is that those chemicals are in the gas we breathe in the shower. The steam will be full of chloramine, which is linked to increased asthma and respiratory problems, and we're putting it straight into our lungs. Personally, I take scalding hot showers in the winter, so I knew that this was an important investment. This is a popular one. Countertop pour-through filters like the Brita are not sufficient in removing the harmful chemicals and pharmaceuticals we've discussed. The Brita does make a tastier glass of water, but it's through removal of odor and taste of chlorine, according to their website. The site goes on to say that the filter helps reduce 99% of lead, mercury, cadmium, benzene, and other contaminants, but has no effect on pharmaceuticals, TTHMs, pesticides, and herbicides. Their faucet filter, however, does, but it has no effect on mercury, cadmium, or fluoride. This is why I recommend a system that pretty much removes everything and then remineralizes. There's going to be holes in most filters, and with the rising amount of drugs in our water, it's better safe than sorry. Okay, I'm coming in after recording to say that I found a pour-over pitcher that does filter out a lot of fluoride. Not all, but a lot. It's the clearly filtered water pitcher with Affinity filtration technology. It's $81 USD. Okay, so here's some resources. A good resource for the Americans listening is the EWG Tap Water Report. You just type in your zip code and it'll tell you the highest contaminants present in your local tap water. For example, I only know like one zip code, so I typed it in and turns out Provo has a lot of TTHMs and arsenic in their water. For the Canadians listening, you'll have to hunt a bit more, but you can Google it and you'll find out. I found out that Calgary, Alberta uses chlorine instead of chloramine, which means that you can just off-gas it in the fridge overnight, which is probably why my skin prefers the water there. However, they just voted to fluoridate the water after years of not. Lethbridge, however, uses ammonia to make chloramine and fluoridates their water. Toronto is the same. Chlorine, ammonia, and fluoride are all added. Vancouver, however, those crazy hippies, I'm so jealous. They don't fluoridate, and their water source is untouched snowmelt and reservoirs that contain no pesticides, pharmaceuticals, or industrial solvents. I'm sure whoever gets their water after they use it, though, they do use chlorine, but I couldn't find any info on whether they also added ammonia. It's also naturally more acidic, so lead is a worry. Slightly more basic filters should work fine there. Today's episode focused mostly on tap water and filtration, but not really on cellular hydration, which is something I'm definitely going to be talking about soon. But our last point today is on the topic of detoxing. Let's face it, most of us were raised on tap water, and because of the many contaminants are accumulative, it's an important thing to prioritize. The first step, of course, is to cease the consumption to a reasonable degree through water, fluoride-containing dental treatments, black, green, oolong, white tea, because even pro-fluoride groups warn you that many teas have unsafe levels of fluoride, as if any amount is safe, as we've already discussed. Teflon-coated cookware uses perfluorinated compounds to make them nonstick. And, many pharmaceuticals. I'm not even going to get into that right now because it's such a big subject to talk about switching to safer medications or going off them at all, but that will be a future episode because I have been able to achieve a lot and hopefully I can help you if you're in the same boat as me. Remember, our bodies only remove 50% of the fluoride we consume on average in a day through our kidneys, so taking very good care of our kidneys is of course important. We can also detox through our sweat, so making sure that we get a good sweat in while working out is important. But what can we do to remove accumulated fluoride? Well, thetruthaboutfluoride.com has a great protocol that includes things I was doing in my preconception health regimen, and he was going more into detail about things, and I'll link it of course, but a main idea in it is actually to build more bone. That is where a lot of fluoride is stored, also in your thyroid and pineal gland, but we can build bone with weight-bearing exercise and a great diet. For diet, a mineral-rich protocol is so important because they counteract the fluoride, especially calcium. High-quality calcium sources like high-quality organic dairy, eggshell powder, bone broth. Now, a lot of people will tell you to supplement boron and iodine. I don't know about that. Those are two things you can get from food. However, I can see how supplementation could help if you're already experiencing fluorosis symptoms. But I don't know. I want to do way more research into that before I say anything else. You're probably going to hear me say that a lot on this podcast. I don't know everything, but I want to. So I ask a lot of questions, and I don't always have the blindly confident manner of speech that makes a lot of people popular when talking about health. But I really want to help. Now, I hope this was helpful. I'm going to end it now because I can tell my voice is starting to crack from talking for too long. I hope I was able to provide some good alternatives that left you feeling empowered rather than just angry at our situation. I know that feeling. If you think this podcast was helpful or informative or anything, please leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. It will really help get the word out. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me on Instagram @HealthyHealthyHolly, and I'll try and help as best as I can. Talk to you next time. Bye.